Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. It's Paul Drabble here. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager with Delta Q Technologies, part of the Zappi group of companies. Again, a very warm welcome to everyone tuning into this session. The topic is moving toward greater electrification of off road equipment. In case you don't know, the session is being recorded, so it's available to watch on demand in the future. And we encourage questions, so please add them to the Q&A tab for discussion at the end of the session, and you can find that tab to the top right of your session window. And please note that your questions will be sent privately. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Sokolsky, who is a program manager at CalStart, who are a US-based nonprofit that promote clean technology and innovations within the transportation sector. So, Steve, the session is now yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to everyone at Delta Q for allowing us this opportunity to talk about some of the work that we're doing and some of the issues that are important to the industry around electrification, and especially in the off-road sector. So with that, let me share my screen. And here we go. So yeah, as I mentioned, I want to talk about mostly some of the incentives that we are involved in developing and administering, but also I want to talk a little bit about some of the background that makes this sector so unique as it applies to electrification. So with that, let me talk a little bit about who we are at CalStart. Was mentioned, we are a national nonprofit. In spite of our name, we are national. We did start in California back in the early 1990s. But what we do is everything we do is built around building and growing the clean transportation technology industry. So it's done through a lot of different methods and ways. So but we do, as I'll show in a few seconds, a lot around demonstrations, helping fleets and end users, and really doing more on the policy side to help grow the industry and help develop the industry. So one thing that makes us unique is that we are a membership organization. We have over 300 members. I think we're closer to 350 now. And this is the strength, the basis of our strength. These members really bring us a lot of knowledge and know-how and really expertise in how to work with new technologies and, more importantly, deploy them intelligently. But as you can see, our membership includes really the gamut of the transportation industry, not just the clean transportation industry. Everything from the OEMs at light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty, the suppliers, the tier suppliers, many of the end user fleets, utilities, agencies, transit agencies. So we have a great family of companies that really help us develop these technologies and deploy them. These aren't all of them on the screen, but these are the majority, and you can see many of them are very familiar to you, and those who are really at the forefront of the clean transportation industry. So the way that we are organized at CalStart, we have different initiatives around end use sectors, as you see across the top. And the work that we do down the left side in the activity areas, which I will describe in a little bit more detail in a second, applies across each of those initiatives. So we are a matrix that really we undertake the same activities across these different infrastructure, maritime, trucks and off-road, buses and transit, and cars and light duty and mobility initiative areas. So again, for each of these initiatives, we are trying to develop and deploy these clean transportation technologies. So when it comes to commercialization, there's different areas and ways that we attack it. in the development, demonstration, and user connection aspect, we actually help our members and project partners put together demonstrations that are often funded by public agencies and others to assemble and deploy some of these new technologies in real world instances and environments. As part of that, we do a lot of performance validation assessment, data collection in the field, where we'll be collecting data, not only performance data, but operating data, economic, business case analyses. We can make that, in this case, much more valuable to not only the users, but to the funders. A lot of what we do is around market acceleration, and I'll be talking about that as kind of the basis of this in the incentive area. But what we'll do is help some of these technologies get into the market through some innovative ways and innovative programs and incentives. Much of what we do is in the policy side too. We help at the state level, the federal level, the regional level, and now even at the federal level, work in new policies, develop these policies, and actually enact them in the ground, on the field. And finally, we do a lot of industry service where we'll support our companies through communications and activities, events, so that they can share information and best practices. I'm gonna for a second. I gotta back up for a second. I forgot to introduce what I'm doing and what I do. I am a program manager at CalSTART. I am based in Madison, Wisconsin. As I said, we are a national organization, but I work in a number of our truck and off-road programs, and I also do some work here in the Midwest region around transit and school bus development. So I'm pretty well-rounded in what CalSTART is doing and what the industry is doing. So I'm going to be talking about market acceleration and some of the programs that we have developed and are now administering, and 3 of them in particular for the state of California, 2 of them for the Air Resources Board, and 1 from the Energy Commission. The gist of my presentation is going to be about the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Program, or CORE, which is for off-road equipment. But the first program that we developed, and is the biggest one that we still administer, is called HVIP, which is the Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Program. These are very similar in structure, and as a matter of fact, CORE, the off-road program, was modeled on HVIP, and it's a way, it's a model for getting incentives to users that doesn't involve awards or tax credits. It's a way to do things point of sale vouchers. There's another program that we do which is semi-similar in structure for the California Energy Commission called Energize, which is strictly for infrastructure programs. And this is both for battery electric program vehicles and also fuel cell. And this is a way to get money to end users who are developing infrastructure for fleets and users who are deploying both light duty and commercial vehicle zero emission vehicles. So these are our 3 market incentive programs, and I'm going to be talking mostly about CORE, the first one, the off-road program. But before I do that, I want to talk about a little bit about some of what we have done with the California Air Resources Board in terms of developing a model for helping get the industry pushed out in terms of zero emission. So we have developed what we call the beachhead model, where you start, it's kind of a funnel. You start with the smaller end of the funnel by market size, the smaller market size, and move out towards larger market size. And we have on both cross and green on the top for the on-road sector, and on the bottom in orange in the off-road sector, where we have started with the end-use applications and platforms that are the easiest and most ripe for electrification. And that grows out as you can exchange systems, componentry, supply chains, and then move out to some of the um, applications and platforms that are a little bit more difficult to electrify, but are getting there as you grow the market out. That red vertical line is where we think we are right now, but we're moving to get more and more platforms electrified and have a full market share. So this is what we see as the model to future electrification of the transportation sector. There are some things that make the off-road sector very unique and much more different from a incentive perspective than the on-road sector. You know, when you look at the on-road sector, whether it's light duty or commercial vehicles, basically you're trying to move people or goods from point A to point B. The thing with the off-road sector and all of the applications within it is you're basically developing equipment to do work. And so it's not as important that you're measuring from an energy perspective miles per gallon or distance per gallon. You're looking at things like how much work can this piece of equipment do on a unit of fuel or in a specific amount of time. So you're looking at gallons per hour or liters per ton of dirt moved if you're looking at earth moving equipment. So each of them is unique. Each of them has different duty cycles. They have different operating environments that are much more challenging than the on-road sector. And on top of that, as we're moving towards electrification, infrastructure becomes a big part of that, because infrastructure is still the greatest challenge for on-road electrification, and it's an even bigger challenge when you look at the off-road sector. So all of these add up to make the off-road sector so much more challenging, especially as we're looking towards electrification. And if you look at each of these different sectors, each of them has different uses, different work cycles and duty cycles. And even within that, if you take a piece of equipment, you might have some of the same equipment. Say something like a wheel loader. A wheel loader can be used differently for earth moving than it is for agriculture, than it is for here where I live. They use it for snow removal. So there's a lot of different things that you could do with the same piece of equipment that is very challenging, and each one might not be ripe for electrification. So that's what just makes this sector so much more challenging to work with. So when you look at some of these issues, especially as they relate to electrification, again, these are the challenges. So, and everything relates, especially to duty cycles. Is this duty cycle a good match for electrification? Just because you have an electric skid steer, is that the right one for you, the way that you are going to use it? Or do you have specific needs in your duty cycle that might not fit with electrification? So that is a big challenge when it comes to applying electrification to off-road equipment. Do you have enough power from the equipment to run the attachments, whether it's a bucket or a lift? So when you compare with, these are mostly run by hydraulics now. Are you going to get the same amount of power with electrification? Is there enough real estate on the equipment for everything that's going to come with electrification? That means the batteries on all the controllers. Sometimes these need much more space than similar diesel or gasoline powered equipment. So will those space constraints be a problem? Then you look at the energy storage, which is going to be the factor here. Will there be adequate batteries to help the sector meet their demands? Will they be able to get through the supply chain challenges that we're looking at right now? And as I mentioned before, how do we charge equipment and the infrastructure that will be needed? If you're looking at the mining sector, the agriculture sector, the construction sector, sometimes they're at very remote job sites and unusual environments. Will you be able to charge equipment there? That just adds to the problems and the issues that we're going to have to deal with. So there's a couple of trends that are benefiting this sector, which I think should be noted, and I think will help push it towards electrification. And these are just examples. I don't want to highlight anything in particular, but everything isn't a challenge. Some things are a benefit. So there are some ideas that we can integrate some of the on-road and off-road markets and the supply chain by sharing some of the components that they're using. One example of this is one of our members, Dana. They're using some of their powertrain equipment across the sector, both on-road and off-road. But there are opportunities out there as we move towards electrification to use some of the same componentry across different sectors. Another one is that some of the more futuristic features such as autonomy will be enabled with electrification. Another one of our partners, Volvo, has demonstrating what they call the electric site, where they're connecting different types of electric driven equipment, excavators and haulers that are fully autonomous, all controlled from a central location at one site. And it will be much more easy to do that when you have electrification driving each of these different components within the system. So when you have these different solutions at a site, electrification can be highlighted and enabled. So those are some of the things that will come in the future and will benefit from electrification, and it'll help overcome some of the challenges that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So a lot of what we're doing in terms of incentive is related to the changing cost structure of electrification and electric platforms. So our partners at Volvo put this TCO model, total cost of ownership model. This is for electric trucks, but for Class 8 trucks. But there's no reason that it's going to be a lot different for other platforms. But the idea is what we're looking at here is when you look at the total cost of ownership over the life cycle of a diesel truck, on the left-hand side, you see that about half of the total cost of energy of the ownership goes towards fuel and energy. And the second biggest component are the acquisition or the capital costs, and that could be upfront purchase costs or leasing costs. But the fuel and energy is the largest component of a diesel platform total cost of ownership. But if you look at the right side, all of a sudden that whole pie changes, and acquisition now is by far more than half the total cost of ownership of a Class 8 truck. And so the idea of fuel and energy, that becomes a much smaller slice. And then things like salvage gets a little bit bigger, and insurance is more important. But that acquisition cost is now the biggest challenge for the purchaser. So the question comes to us, when it comes to that acquisition cost, which is basically the base platform cost plus what we call the incremental cost, which is the difference between the diesel base cost and the electric cost and all the things that go with it, and mostly energy storage. But how do we minimize that incremental cost? And the incentives that we have developed are all based on minimizing or even eliminating that incremental cost. Excuse me. So the core program, the Clean Off-Road Equipment Program, is an incentive program that we developed with the California Air Resources Board to basically incentive and develop a point of sale program especially for zero emission off-road equipment. And by zero emission, we mean battery and hydrogen fuel cell. But the idea is to offset and minimize as much as possible that incremental cost with this point of sale discount. And on top of that, there's additional funding available for some of the infrastructure costs and also for equipment that's deployed in some of these areas that might not normally get the attention that some of the bigger fleets will get if they're operated by small businesses or in disadvantaged communities. So all of these are elements of the core program, and they are similar elements of the other incentive programs that we're running. So the core program has some principles that are developed by the Air Resources Board that help structure the program and make sure that it meets some of the goals of CARB. But they are really meant to transform the market and get the cleanest technologies to the market as quickly as possible. And these are all done as a way to support CARB's overall strategies. And they have a lot, as you probably heard, that they are doing to make sure that the market is transforms towards zero emission over the next 15 years. But this is supposed to drive purchase decisions for end users in conjunction with the strategies that the state has developed. But the structure is to make sure that as the industry is changing and transforming, that we don't get disruptions and we have a smooth flow of technology developed and deployed. We have predictable funding. And when those technologies reach much more maturation, they are much more available, and the prices come down through economies of scale, then those technologies move out of the program and just become regular technologies and products that you can buy in the market. And of course, we want to make sure these are all equitable and that everybody can take advantage of them, whether you're a smaller fleet or you're working in a disadvantaged area. So if you're an equipment user or a fleet user, but an equipment user in California, we have made this program as simple as possible. It is open to everyone, anyone who operates equipment in California, and that could be a public agencies, that could be a private company, anybody who operates, no matter whether you're large or small. So you can partake in the core program. We have two small restrictions, and these are pretty easy to live by. The equipment purchaser must own and operate the equipment within California for 3 years. That's it. And within those 3 years, they submit annual activity reports, which is basically how many hours a year did they use the equipment. But besides that, they can get as many vouchers as possible as they need. There's no limit on that, and the size of the fleet the small fleets are in the same boat as the large fleets here. So we have structured this program to make it as easy as possible for all types of users in California to utilize this. So the way that it works, if you're an equipment user, is we have a catalog of equipment, and I will be going through some of the equipment types that are part of the program. But basically what they go to the equipment catalog, they choose the equipment that they need. They go to one of the dealers who we have been working with. They give the basic information about the location to that dealer. The dealer will then submit a request for a voucher, which will then be saved for that dealer for you as the equipment user. When the equipment is purchased and delivered, then the dealer redeems that voucher and takes that voucher value off the cost of the equipment. So we are working one-on-one with the dealer, and for the end user, it's basically seamless. So that voucher value comes off the equipment purchase price, and then the equipment is delivered to the end user, and with that incentive amount applied to it. So if you're an end user, it's a great process where you don't have to apply for tax credits or go through an award and be a competitive situation. It's a first come, first serve. As long as there's money in the fund and there's very adequate funding available, then for the end user, it's a seamless process where we work with the equipment dealer and make sure that the voucher value is applied to the price of the equipment that is delivered to that end user. For the manufacturers who are building this equipment and supplying it to the market, it's a very simple process also. We have an implementation manual where they have to put together a few documents that are reviewed by CARB. And once that process is complete and CARB approves the equipment to be utilized within the core program, boom, they bring in the dealers, the equipment manufacturers bring in their dealers to enroll in the process, and that piece of equipment becomes part of the overall core catalog. This is basically what the equipment manufacturers have to go through. It's a very simple process. CARB will want to know how it was put together. They're going to want some basic test data. They're going to want some cost information so that we could set the voucher value, so we know how much to give as a voucher incentive. But then there's also some basic information on your service network, how you collect data through your telematics, these basic user experience, and anything that you have for your end-of-life disposal plans. But this is not onerous if you're a manufacturer of equipment. It's something you've probably gone through before as you introduce equipment into the market. So once this equipment becomes part of the core catalog, it is renewed every year as you bring in new models. For the dealers of the equipment who are selling the equipment for the equipment manufacturers, and these are the ones who we're working with one-on-one. It's a very simple process for them to become also part of the program. We have some training materials that we do everything web-based. They register and become part of the program. They look at we have a training program where we train the dealers in the voucher incentive programs system that we use, the overall on-site web program. They take a quick quiz, make sure they know how to do the program, and then they send in their documentation and they become part. So everything is on our website at californiacore.org, and all of the information for both users, dealers, and equipment manufacturers are part of that website. So we have 9 different categories of equipment that we provide incentives for as part of the core program. We have terminal tractors, which have become the most popular equipment category. These were originally part of the HVIP program, which I mentioned earlier, but they have been moved to the core because both on-road and off-road uses are part of terminal tractors. So they are now part of core, but also the other categories here, and they really run the gamut, and we're adding new ones. They run the gamut of the different equipment used in off-road sectors, whether it's cargo handling equipment at ports and airports, ground support equipment, things used at rail yards, switchers and movers, mobile power units. We have now brought on construction equipment, electrified skid steer loaders, smaller excavators, but now moving on to larger backhoes and loaders, and same thing with mining equipment, agricultural equipment that is now electrified, and the newest one is commercial harbor craft. So you can see we have a pretty strong focus on the ports and the airports. The ports are the very much the largest sector of pollution in California, the ports, especially in Los Angeles and Long Beach. So CARB has been very focused on making sure that the activities at the ports and the equipment used at the ports are as clean as possible. And this program helps meet that goal by giving incentives to a lot of the equipment, whether it's cargo handling, ground support equipment, or some of the crafts or rail equipment used at the ports. As I mentioned, some of the newer equipments that brought on in our latest funding year have been agricultural, construction, switcher locomotives, and commercial harbor craft. So these have been very well received, and we have started to bring in a lot of different equipment into the catalog. And here, and you'll see, these are the voucher amounts for each of the catalogs, each of the categories involved. And as I mentioned, we're trying to minimize or eliminate that incremental cost. So to do that, very often the incremental cost, as you know, can be double the base cost of a comparable diesel equipment. So if you have a diesel forklift and then the electric version costs twice that amount, we want to cover that incremental cost through the voucher incentive. So the amounts are dependent on the size of the equipment, and we have set for each equipment use. But you can see we have very large incentive amounts for each piece of equipment in each category, and in many of them up to $500,000 in vouchers. For commercial harbor crafts up to $1 million, but others, depending on the size, really cover that incremental cost and bring that cost comparative and the cost parity to conventional equipment back down to earth. So this project started in 2020, and we had two different funding periods. There was one funding period that covered the period from 2020 to 2022. Last year, there was more funding was brought in. A new funding period started that is still going on in this year. You can see that the number of OEMs have doubled, the number of dealers have more than tripled, equipment types have more than doubled, and the vouchers have increased because of the higher voucher amounts. We're getting increases there too. One of the things in this current funding period, we added professional landscaping equipment, which has really brought in a lot of vouchers. And for smaller companies that are doing commercial landscaping, there's a lot of electric equipment on there, and we now have vouchers for that equipment, and they are part of the core program. You can see in the first funding years of 20 to 22, as I mentioned, terminal tractors were by far the biggest part, almost half of the program. Terminal tractors and TRUs, refrigeration units, they took up the majority of that original $70 million that were funded. But more was brought in, and you can see we broke out. We set up a contingency fund to make sure that There was not, the waiting list wasn't too long. And we also made sure that the equipment operated in disadvantaged communities was called out. And a lot of that, you could see more than almost 2/3 of the equipment was operated in disadvantaged community areas. In the second funding period that we're now completing right in 2023, by bringing in some of these new categories, all of a sudden the percentage of terminal tractors and TRUs have gone down, and construction and ag have gone up, and forklifts have gone up also. So right now, I got to admit we're oversubscribed right now, but the good news is that later this summer, new funding will start with the new funding year, and there will be $200 million in additional funding for CORE built around the same structure of the program as there are now. So we'll be able to fund much more equipment going forward in 2023 to 2024 and future years. So, but you can see the terminal tractors is still very popular, but some of the others, construction equipment, have done very well. And the $30 million set aside for professional landscaping has gone very well too, and we're getting a lot of demand for that. So just so you know, here are some of the equipment that we have been funding through the CORE program, from small agricultural tractors, skid steers and small excavators, forklifts, everything over 8-ton capacity. The bottom left is a mobile power unit that is very popular and is becoming more, will be becoming more popular as we see portable and mobile power used for infrastructure of on-road equipment in California, because we're seeing that as more and more fleets on the on-road sector are purchasing zero emission or electric trucks, that the infrastructure is now having trouble catching up, and that installation of high-powered infrastructure is a little bit slow to get completed. So there are some needs for temporary or portable power. And in addition to providing portable power in the field, there will be a need for portable power at permanent locations to bridge that gap before permanent power is complete. And you can see the other categories of rail switchers and terminal tractors are there. Just to toot our own horn a little bit, there are a couple projects that we worked on in terms of developing electrification within the off-road sector. We worked with Southwest Airlines and US EPA to retrofit some pushback tugs in California, where we took some old Tier 0 diesel, refit them, refurbish them, put electric motors and batteries in there, and now they're brand new and they're being used as electric pushbacks in San Jose and Los Angeles, and Southwest is deploying those in more of their stations now. And another one of the projects that we're involved in right now on the development side is with Hyster-Yale Group, of an electric top pick that is used and demonstrated at the Port of Los Angeles. This is used basically to move containers from in the port terminals, and this one's being used at the APM terminal at the Port of Los Angeles. But this is an inductively charged 250 kilowatt top pick that is now being demonstrated. There's also a fuel cell model at the same time being demonstrated by Hyster-Yale. So we are collecting data on the performance of these, and these will become regular models and products sold by Hyster-Yale. But we're part of getting funding for the demonstration. We're collecting data and we'll be reporting that. And these products will be part of the CORE catalog when they become commercially available. So to wrap up, what we're doing as part of this presentation and others, we are making sure that industry is familiar with our programs for incentives, talking to the different end user groups, the the ports, and in particular the airports, the air districts in California, the industry association, making sure they understand the structures of these programs, how they're built, how they're administered, and how their constituents can take part of these, because it's a good model. As I've mentioned, this is happening in California right now, but other states are looking to adopt this model. We're working with other stakeholders to see if other states that are following some of the California regulations are ready to pick up this incentive model. So it wouldn't be surprised if some of the states in the Northwest, in the New England, and other states are picking this up. We're talking to the federal government and EPA and US DOE about this model and seeing what we could do to get this model adopted federally. And also our Global Drive to Zero is talking to countries around the world about different ways to help end users adopt and deploy some of these technologies, and also move market acceleration. So we're very excited about the incentive market, how we can move technologies forward, and how we can build incentives to help accomplish that task. So with that, I would like to say thank you. I am available for any questions. Here is my contact information. Feel free to contact me anytime, any questions you might have about any work that CalSTART does or any of the incentives that we administer. And with that, I will stop sharing and take any questions you have. Thank you again. And real quickly, I'd like to put in a plug for one of our partners tomorrow. One of the speakers will be Interactive Analysis, Alistair Hayfield, talking about some of the industry research that they've done. So I hope you will tune in tomorrow and listen to Alistair. But with that, I will say thank you and take any questions you have.
Okay, thanks a lot, Steve. We've got just over 17 minutes remaining to the end of the session. So we've got 5 great questions that were submitted. So we'll just start on the first one. And that is, what are the main barriers to mass adoption for electric off-road equipment, and what solutions are on the horizon to counter them?
Yeah, Paul, I would say right now the main barriers, in addition to the cost barrier, that high initial capital costs that we are trying to attack through some of these incentive programs, I think the biggest barrier is infrastructure. As I mentioned, infrastructure is a barrier across the sectors of electrification. Off-road has its unique challenges that I mentioned, and I think solving some of those infrastructure barriers will be a way for electrification to get a better grip and a better traction within the market. So I would say the infrastructure barrier is one that needs to be attacked. Some of those market barriers around lowering capital costs will be, as equipment matures and the market matures, they will naturally come down and become less of a barrier, but infrastructure will need to be the one that's attacked first.
Okay, great. Question 2, do suppliers and commercial vehicle manufacturers see a time when, based on volume, they can attain price parity with the current technology, or will there always be a need for incentives for users to obtain a reasonable ROI?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an issue for a while, was my personal opinion. That it's going to be hard until the battery industry fully matures and batteries become cost competitive and easily available, because you have other issues involved there, like the availability of materials, rare earth materials and others, and just capacity to manufacture the amount of batteries that will be needed by industry. I think that the cost parity issue will be in existence for a while. It will reduce as time goes on, but it will be an issue until energy storage becomes much less of a component to that incremental cost structure than it is now.
Okay. The next question, when will the grid be able to handle the load due to charging all of these vehicles?
Yeah, good question. That's an excellent question. And I think some of the strategies used, whether it is microgrids or other ways of connecting the vehicle to the grid and utilizing some of the energy capacity of the vehicles, those will be strategies that utilities will have to undertake. I think right now uh, we're okay, and utilities are handling the demand, but I can foresee some bottlenecks in the future because if we see the adoption that we hope, there is going to be some log jams. We're seeing some issues already with some utilities who are just having a hard time uh, getting scheduling done for upgrading some of the facilities, transformers, and equipment needed for high powered and large scale charging at fleet facilities. So it is going to be an issue, and I think the grid could be a barrier if things go as we anticipate, and uh, equipment becomes available and vehicles become available. Then there may be a catch-up situation where the utilities and the grid will be lagging a little bit, and I hope that doesn't happen.
Okay. Well, there's a comment slash question in terms of another restriction for off-road devices would be the availability of batteries, the endurance of those batteries, plus the sustainability aspect of that wrapped in it. So that was a comment question if you want to comment on that.
No, I agree totally, and that availability, and I think that's going to affect the zero emission transportation sector as a whole. How are we going to make sure that batteries and energy storage are available and that costs come down as necessary? Because that is going to be that barrier and linchpin toward greater adoption.
Okay. Final question, just looking at stationary equipment such as marine loading arms and other types of equipment that lean heavily on hydraulics, but are already today in some sense electrified. Would these products benefit from your programs if they would leave hydraulic systems for electromechanical solutions? And zero emissions do not necessarily mean optimized for minimum CO2 footprint and sustainability.
I understand. If the equipment meets the California priorities and strategies, and that equipment does have high uses in those sectors that CARB is emphasizing, then I think they will be adopted within these incentive programs as they mature. Right now, the equipment that I highlighted are equipment that are used in the goods movement sectors that are the strongest in California, are having the most climate impact. But those pieces of equipment that you mentioned, if they do mature to the same rate and they do fit within California's strategy, then there's no reason why they can't be incented like the equipment we're having as part of our incentive catalog.
Okay. We had one more question pop up. What is the current source of the funding for the voucher incentive program?
Most of it is coming through the California Cap and Trade program, the AQIP program that is funded through the California Cap and Trade program. And that's a multi-billion-dollar program that funds a large amount of California climate initiatives. But the Cap and Trade program is basically creators of energy, whether they are refiners or other liquid fuel producers, pay into it, and then that is then utilized. There's a cap and trade scheme where those credits are then traded by those who are creating some of the gaps in the system and create the credits side of it. So the cap and trade program is the source of most of the CARB funding for these climate change programs.
Okay. There's actually one more question that popped up
Sure.
on the different channel from one of our guys, Murad, who presented
Sure.
earlier. Do you expect the federal government will put more incentive for off-road equipment electrification? If yes, what format will they be? And that's
we think so. We have been talking to, as I mentioned, EPA and DOE. I think EPA especially understands these programs. They have been a little bit bolder in terms of the deployment side of it. And this model, a point of sale incentives, I think is starting to build a history of success so that the federal agencies will be adopting them. We have been, and our partners especially have been talking to EPA a lot in terms of ways that they can adopt some of these. And depending on the budget situation in Washington, if EPA does move toward greater incentives for off-road and on-road, that this model of point of sale vouchers will be adopted in the future.
Okay. All right, there's no more questions. So this session brings the first day of the 2023 Future of Electrification Conference to a conclusion. On behalf of the Zappi Group, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to everyone who presented and participated in the audience and also patiently endured through some technical glitches that affected some of the earlier sessions. So if you had trouble accessing Felix Gerard's presentation, Power Sources, Transition and Material Handling, or Julian Swam's Unplug and Play, Wireless Power Game Changer for AGV and AMR, you can watch those recordings in the platform under the agenda tab. So we look forward to having you join us tomorrow for a new day of presentations and discussions, including our keynote speaker, Alex Edmonds, who is presenting a very powerful, compelling case for electrification. So we hope to see you tomorrow and have a great evening and take care.